Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be with you. So my name is Khaled Tawfik. I'm a managing director and partner out of BCG. And alongside Tanmay, my partner, we lead the marketplace team at BCG. So we work with a lot of distributors, retailers to help them launch their marketplaces from strategy all the way to implementation and scaling. We also work with some of the leading marketplaces around the world to help them scale, optimize their business. It's great to see some familiar faces here and catch up during the breaks. We'll talk a little bit today about specialty marketplaces and how the marketplace model is evolving. Tanmay will kick us off, and then I'll take over.
Hi all. So if we look at the market today, what we are seeing is that marketplace is the winning model in e-commerce. Today, 70% of e-commerce sales come from marketplaces globally. That figure was 40% 10 years ago. So within the fastest growing market, marketplace is the fastest growing channel. If you look around the world, 93% of markets have a marketplace business as the leading e-commerce player. What's really interesting is, historically, you used to see those pure plays, the Amazons and so on of the world. Increasingly, what we're seeing is a lot of specialty marketplaces, which are retailer-led or distributor-led, actually starting to take share. And that's going to be the theme of today's presentation. So why are these retailers launching marketplaces? There's 4 key reasons, and I'm going to dive into each of them in a bit more detail in a second. 1, it's better for the customer. 2nd, it's operationally very simple to run. Thirdly, they have superior economics. And finally, there's a point around data. I can't do a presentation without mentioning data now that they say data is the new oil. But if we start with the customer, I think everyone's familiar with the point around range. Historically, retailers were a one-stop shop. People went into a retail store because they could find everything they wanted in one place. Amazon has redefined what the meaning of a one-stop shop is. And by copying that Amazon-type marketplace model, we're actually finding a lot of retailers are able to take back their history as the destination for that category. But what was really interesting when we did the research was, while range was 1 point, actually, marketplaces won on 6 out of 9 of the key customer purchasing criteria. And the reason that specialty marketplaces are doing well is, if you look at the 3 that traditional marketplaces weren't serving that well, high quality products, good customer services, and rewards for loyalty, those are typically assets that retailers have that allow them to capitalize on those to really take share from those everything stores. The second part is around the scalability of the model. So earlier today, you heard from Cisco around marketplace allowing them to get products on site 10 times faster than what they usually do. In a traditional retail model, when you want to have new range, you have to work out what that range is. You have to find the suppliers. You have to then negotiate with them. You then price the product, promote the product, merchandise the product, and then fulfill it. In a marketplace model, all you need to do is vet and identify the sellers, and you let them do the rest. What that means is, you can see that the time to get a product live, it allows you to have a lot more agility in that model. We actually have a client in the UK at the moment who went from a 9-month typical process to get a product live to their fastest time, which is 1 week from idea to having a product live, which allowed them to be a lot more responsive to trends. The second thing is, because you pass a lot of that responsibility onto the seller, it allows you to operate in a resource-light manner. So again, we have another client in Europe who, with a team of 6 FTE, manages to run a 100 million business, which is growing at 30% year on year. What that resource-light profile allows you to have is an economically advantaged model. So what you can see on the left here is a typical marketplace P&L. So what I would say is, this is an average. It varies by category. But what we typically see in the market is, with a take rate of around 12 to 15% on commission, with a retail media business, you can actually make 7 to 9 percentage points of margin. That is often profit accretive versus most retailers' first-party businesses. Now, you won't get there in year 1, of course. That's more like year 3 onwards. But it is seen as quite a profitable business, given the low nature of cost associated with marketplace. Beyond cost, though, there's a couple of interesting elements. Firstly, from a return on invested capital, it's a relatively light CapEx profile for the growth and return it drives. The second important point that we've seen in the market as well is around valuations. So marketplaces are valued very differently by shareholders versus your traditional retail businesses. So if you look at Walmart, we recently had a conversation with the investor community, and they value Walmart's business, both first party and third party in e-commerce, at 3x multiple on their GMV. So if you think about $100+ billion business, that's over $300 billion of shareholder value. And the final point before I hand over to Khaled then is data. So as you use Marketplace to go into a whole new range of missions and you go deeper in a lot of your existing missions, you get a huge amount of data. That's incredible for helping you improve your personalization capabilities. There's been a lot of talk of retail media today as well from a monetization perspective. But what's also really interesting is how you can use that data to then improve your first-party assortment. There's a client we had in Europe again who I remember speaking to the commercial director when they launched their marketplace, and they said, we have the best range. We don't need marketplace. They launched their marketplace, and one of their categories was barbecues. What they found was the shape of demand for barbecues in the market was actually very different from the range they had in stores. So it was a very interesting data point that helped them then take that and improve their store portfolio to drive sales there. But that's the generics of the marketplace model. What we're finding is actually the type of marketplace, as I mentioned earlier, that's winning is changing. So I'll hand over to Khaled to talk through that.
Yeah, thanks, Tanmay. So we started with the marketplace model being a way to aggregate as much traffic and match it with as much supply as you can. In order to do that, the model was a very efficient model, very functional in nature, and most importantly, universal across categories, right? There was no differentiation or customization in terms of how the customer shops the category. So the customer had to do the heavy work to sift through the range, the breadth, the heavy work to learn about the products, get inspired, and so on. This is creating an opportunity because there are different customer needs that are required. And what that's opened up is a differentiated experience, an experience that is fundamentally rooted in the category, giving a different customer experience and journey through that category's purchase journey. It's given a different way to integrate stores into that journey. So returns, click and collect, showrooming in stores. And also lastly, it's leveraging the brand and the trust in that brand to give customers the peace of mind that they're buying from somebody they trust, that somebody, if anything goes wrong, will really stand up to them and give them what they need. To give you an example of this, let's take DIY or home. Try to shop that on an everything marketplace. You need to go everywhere from inspiration to advice to transaction and to installation afterwards. That is very, very different to when I'm buying my food, when I'm buying my clothing, when I'm buying something else. And that is what these marketplaces are capitalizing on, is that differentiated experience. Now, customers are also telling us that they prefer this. So almost 2/3 of shoppers would ideally choose to buy on a specialty marketplace versus an everything marketplace or a general marketplace. That applies across categories as well. So when you put in front of a customer the choice of the same product at the same price, you find that about 80% of the transactions are up for grabs versus in Amazon. Now, about 40 to 50% of that is I would very actively prefer and go to a specialty marketplace. Another 30 to 40% of that is indifferent, i.e. up for grabs. And then the remaining 20% are, I'm just going to do Amazon. Now, I mean, if I'm a retailer and I look at that, I'm like, that's pretty good. I've got 80% of the market I can go after, right? So the customer is voting and has had enough of this sifting through everything to find what they need. They want something that is tailored to what they're shopping. Maybe I should take that from you. Thank you. So look, retailers have caught on, obviously. From 1990 to 2010 was the time of the everything marketplace. So we all know these names, and they have been and continue to be very successful, but the rest have caught on. And maybe the only two things to say here is this applies across different verticals, whether that's fashion, consumer electronics, or health and beauty, applies across geographies, and applies with many brand names that are very, very famous and very known. But it's also working. You guys have heard lots of stories throughout the day. These are 3 other ones. I'll pick on one to start. So Kingfisher, and more specifically B&Q. So B&Q is the largest DIY retailer in the UK. They launched their marketplace in 2022, focused on DIY and home. So they wanted to be the destination for everything you need for your home. Very different experience to Amazon that they're putting in their marketplace. Now, fast forward a couple of years, 400 million of GMV, about 40% of their e-commerce. But actually what's really interesting is 50% of the traffic that's coming is new traffic. So these are folks that were not coming to it's called DIY.com before. And 85% of that GMV is net new, i.e. there's only 15% that is actually cannibalizing their own range, which is amazing given how much range they've added to that site. Finally, it's also profitable and profit accretive to Tanmay's point before. Look, that same thing applies for Decathlon and sporting goods. So they're at about 700 million of GMV right now with plans to go up to 1 billion. And MediaMarkt in consumer electronics, who are about 300 million of GMV and looking to double within the next couple of years. So many retailers are finding success in the model. But what do you need to get right for that to work? Talk about the what first. I talked about it before. It needs to be fundamentally rooted in the category. What is it that your customer demands when they're shopping this category? And how can you curate? And by curate, I mean not just limit the choice, but actually find the right sellers, find the right experience, understand what the key drivers of choice are in that category, and give them a journey that provides that. Second is you have to leverage your brand. Leverage the trust that exists in your brand, right? And what we mean by that is a couple of things. Number one is taking responsibility for customer service. I really loved Russell's point earlier when in their B2B food distribution business, a seller missed a delivery and there was a wedding the next day and the sales force went out and bought all the herbs required for that delivery to make sure that the wedding goes ahead. This is the sort of thing that the trust in the brand multiplies on. The second thing on brand trust is around seller selection. So really being very careful who you invite to sell on your marketplace and then giving them free rein to choose the range and serve your customers. And finally, it's about quality control. It's actually making sure that the products that are sold on your marketplace stand up to your brand promise fundamentally. We talked about leveraging your store network, about returns, click and collect, showrooming. But actually, I want to spend a bit more time on the how, which I think is a lot more important. First and foremost, this has to be a CEO-led, exec-led initiative. This is not a tech project. It has to have a very clear strategy that is bought in by the whole exec. Otherwise, it's doomed to fail. Every single implementation of a marketplace we've done, there's been a really careful balance that has to be struck between 1P and 3P. This is a fundamentally different model, so therefore you have to give it the autonomy, you have to hire the capabilities that are required, but actually that needs to be really well integrated with the rest of the business to ensure that the incentives are set in the right way and that the final product that's coming to the customer is cohesive. And then the last one is really important in the early days. It's about GMV growth. There's a lot of things that come later around the profitability that Tanmay is talking about. But if you're not scaling GMV upfront, you will not get any of the benefits of the marketplace. What that means is you have to scale sellers and you have to scale range. That is the number one driver of GMV at the end of the day. Let me just close by broadening this out a little bit. So marketplace, we've talked about why specialty marketplaces are becoming more important, but it's not just important in its own right. It's important because it fundamentally is a cornerstone of a digital virtuous cycle that retailers can benefit from. It's a virtuous cycle alongside retail media and a virtuous cycle alongside personalization. So the more marketplace sellers and range you have, the more retail media inventory and therefore bid density because of all the sellers you have, increasing your retail media income. It's also a way to get a lot more data because of the more interactions with your customers, more offer that your customers are touching, which then allows you to personalize the experience even more, benefiting both retail media and the marketplace again. When we looked at recent research we actually just released today, we find that the leaders in this space generate about 2 to 3 percentage points of total shareholder return above others, which is about a third of their outperformance in shareholder return. So massive value accretion for shareholders. But that's also accelerating. So those leaders are investing 4 times more in these new revenue streams than the laggards, and they're generating 2 times more the returns of those laggards. So the flywheel is working for them, and they're advancing, and therefore the imperative for everybody is, well, you better start soon, and you better start quick to accelerate along the same journey. Thank you very much.